Tyler Galpin might honestly be the hardest character in Wednesday to predict right now, because the show keeps changing what kind of character he actually is. In Season 1, he starts off looking like the awkward love interest working at the Weathervane, and then by the end he's revealed to be the Hyde behind the attacks. Season 2 pushes him somewhere completely different again. Isolated, unstable, dealing with Francoise's death, leaving Jericho with Isadora, clearly heading into much darker territory emotionally. And now heading into Season 3, it feels like his storyline could realistically go in almost any direction. The show could try redeeming him. It could turn him into a full antagonist. It could keep him trapped somewhere in between, where you never fully know whether he's dangerous or not. And honestly, I think that uncertainty is a big part of why Tyler works for so many people in the fandom, because underneath the Hyde storyline, he's also one of the messiest characters emotionally in the entire series. A lot of what he does comes from manipulation, loneliness, anger, identity issues, wanting connection, wanting revenge, sometimes all at the same time. And the show never makes it completely clear where Tyler ends and where the Hyde begins, which leaves Season 3 with a lot to figure out. So today, I want to go through the biggest theories around Tyler's future, what the actual setup from Seasons 1 and 2 seems to be pointing toward, and which direction honestly makes the most sense if the show wants his character to keep evolving instead of just repeating the same twist again. I'm Raphael CG, this is Wednesday Universe, and let's get into it. So before getting into Season 3 theories, we kind of need to stop and look at where Tyler actually is by the end of Season 2, because the show leaves him in a really strange position morally. Depending on how you read the character, Tyler is either somebody who was manipulated and lost control of his life, or somebody who keeps using that manipulation as an excuse for things he very clearly chose to do himself. And I think the show intentionally keeps both interpretations alive. Back in Season 1, Tyler mostly just felt like the normal guy in the middle of all the Nevermore chaos. He worked at the Weathervane, seemed awkward around Wednesday, had the whole small-town barista energy the show kept leaning into early on. And for a while, it honestly looked like the series was setting him up as Wednesday's softer connection to the outside world, somebody more emotionally grounded compared to all the things happening around her. Then the Hyde reveal completely changes the context of basically every scene he's in, because Tyler is specifically a Hyde, an outcast whose transformation is tied to manipulation and control from a master, in his case, Marilyn Thornhill. And what makes Tyler interesting compared to a lot of similar twist villain characters is that the show never fully answers how much of his behavior is the Hyde and how much is Tyler himself. Even before the reveal, there are moments where he seems genuinely drawn to Wednesday. Then later, he admits part of him enjoyed what he was doing as the Hyde. The show keeps blurring those lines on purpose. By the end of Season 1, everything completely falls apart. Wednesday exposes him, Tyler attacks her in the woods, Enid transforms for the first time and fights him, and Sheriff Galpin is basically forced to watch his own son become the thing he'd been afraid of the entire season. And honestly, the father-son stuff is part of what keeps Tyler from feeling like a generic monster reveal. Sheriff Galpin spends most of the season trying to explain away the warning signs because he desperately wants Tyler to still just be a normal kid. Then Season 2 pushes things even further. Tyler gets transferred to Willow Hill, which already feels less like a hospital and more like a place the Wednesday universe uses to quietly throw dangerous outcasts out of sight. And pretty early on, Tyler kills Thornhill, which matters because once his master is gone, the Hyde situation becomes much more unstable. He's not being controlled anymore, but he's also losing whatever structure was keeping the transformations contained in the first place. Around the same time, the show introduces Francoise, Tyler's mother, who everybody believed was dead. And honestly, I think bringing her into the story changes Tyler's character more than the Hyde reveal itself did, because suddenly his condition stops feeling unique. You realize this is something inherited, something that's been destroying his family long before Wednesday ever arrived in Jericho. Francoise is already physically falling apart from years of transformations, and her entire plan is basically built around stopping Tyler from ending up the same way. But Tyler doesn't want the Hyde removed, he wants control over it, which feels important going into Season 3, because those are two very different goals. Then you get the final confrontation at Nevermore, where Wednesday has every reason to kill him and just doesn't. She cuts him loose instead. And honestly, that decision feels very Wednesday. Not merciful exactly, more like she sees Tyler as something unfinished. The rooftop fight with Francoise ends with Tyler surviving and his mother dying, and by the end of the season he leaves with Isadora Capri, who offers him this sanctuary for Hydes without masters. Which sounds safe on paper, but in a show like Wednesday, it also sounds like the kind of thing that could become dangerous very quickly depending on what Isadora actually wants. So that's where Tyler stands now heading into Season 3. No master, no parents, no real connection to Jericho anymore, and apparently heading toward a place full of other Hydes learning how to control themselves, which honestly could push his storyline in almost any direction now. So, your biggest theory going into Season 3 is probably the most obvious one, that the show is setting Tyler up for some kind of redemption arc. Not the kind where everybody suddenly forgives him after 2 emotional conversations and everything's fine again. Honestly, I don't think the show could get away with that even if it wanted to. Tyler's done too much at this point. But a slower version? Something messier where he's trying to become better while people around him still don't trust him at all? That feels a lot more possible. And there are a few reasons people keep leaning toward that direction. The biggest one is still Wednesday freeing him at the end of Season 2, because Wednesday is not somebody who makes emotional decisions impulsively. Even when she cares about someone, she usually filters it through logic first. So the fact that she chooses not to kill Tyler when she absolutely could have feels important. Not romantic, necessarily, just important. It feels like she sees him as more complicated than a simple monster by that point. Then there's Francoise. I think her storyline changes Tyler's entire character arc moving forward because now there's this added layer of inheritance and inevitability around the Hyde condition. Tyler stops feeling like an isolated case and starts feeling like somebody trapped inside something that already destroyed his family before him. And watching his mother die trying to save him probably changes the way he sees himself too. Not instantly. The show would need to take its time with that, but it's hard to imagine Season 3 completely ignoring the emotional weight of Tyler realizing somebody sacrificed themselves because they still believed he could become something better. Then you have Isadora's sanctuary, and honestly, from a storytelling perspective, the show probably doesn't introduce a whole sanctuary for masterless Hydes unless it plans to spend real time exploring what that life looks like. That setup almost feels designed for a redemption storyline. Tyler learning how to exist without a master, learning where the Hyde ends and his own choices begin, being around other people struggling with the same thing instead of constantly being isolated. There's a lot the show could do there. I also think the redemption theory becomes more believable if Season 3 keeps Tyler and Wednesday uncomfortable around each other instead of trying to immediately rebuild trust. Because realistically, Wednesday has reasons to hate him. Enid definitely has reasons to hate him. A lot of people at Nevermore probably see him as a murderer before anything else. And honestly, they're not wrong. That's the difficult part of this theory, because Tyler wasn't just manipulated. The show also heavily implies there were moments where he enjoyed the violence, or at least stopped resisting it. And if Season 3 pretends none of that matters, the whole redemption arc falls apart immediately. But if the show treats redemption as something ugly and difficult instead of clean and inspirational, then I think it could actually work really well for his character, especially because Wednesday as a series tends to be more interested in damaged people trying to figure themselves out than in purely heroic characters anyway. So I could absolutely see a version of Season 3 where Tyler keeps trying to help, keeps trying to control the Hyde, keeps trying to prove he's not beyond saving, while most people around him still aren't fully convinced. So, the second big theory gets a lot darker. What if Wednesday eventually becomes Tyler's master? Not in a romantic fantasy kind of way. More because the show has already established that controlling a Hyde might be the only reliable way to stop one from becoming dangerous. And Season 2 actually pushes Wednesday surprisingly close to that decision already. That's the part people sometimes forget. She actively tries to recreate Thornhill's research because she thinks controlling Tyler might be safer than leaving him unstable and unpredictable. The plan fails, but the fact she was willing to attempt it at all says a lot about where her head was at emotionally by that point in the story. Because Wednesday usually hates control when it's used against people, but she also becomes extremely pragmatic whenever somebody she cares about is in danger, especially Enid. And Tyler is probably the biggest unresolved threat still connected to Nevermore heading into Season 3. Even if he's trying to improve, the Hyde problem itself hasn't disappeared. He's still unstable, still dangerous under the wrong circumstances. So I can understand why some fans think the show might eventually force Wednesday into a position where controlling Tyler feels like the least bad option available, especially if Isadora's sanctuary turns out to be less safe than it sounds. There's also the relationship angle, obviously. A huge part of the fandom still likes the idea of Wednesday and Tyler together in some form, and a Master-Hyde connection would automatically keep them tied to each other emotionally and narratively even if trust between them is completely broken. But honestly, I think that's also why this theory gets uncomfortable really fast once you think about it for more than 5 minutes. Because the Hyde-Master relationship is fundamentally built around obedience and control. And Wednesday, out of almost every character in the series, understands how dangerous control can become when one person starts deciding what another person is allowed to be. That's basically her entire problem with Thornhill in Season 1. So if the show ever does go in this direction, I don't think it can frame the dynamic as romantic or healthy without it feeling really wrong tonally. Complicated? Sure. Desperate? Maybe. But not healthy. And honestly, I think Enid becomes a huge factor here too, because there's no realistic version of this storyline where Enid is comfortable watching Wednesday voluntarily tie herself to Tyler after everything that happened between them, especially after Tyler tried to kill both of them. So even if Wednesday ever considered becoming his master temporarily for strategic reasons, it would probably create serious tension inside the group almost immediately, which honestly is part of why I'm not fully convinced the show goes this route long term. It feels more like the kind of idea the writers might flirt with briefly because it creates tension and emotional conflict, but actually committing to it permanently would change Wednesday and Tyler's relationship into something much darker than I think the series probably wants at its center. But the third theory is the one that probably changes the direction of the show the most if it ends up being true. What if Isadora isn't rescuing Tyler at all? What if she's recruiting him? Because the more you go back through season 2, the stranger Isadora's role actually starts to feel. At first, she comes across as one of the more emotionally stable adults at Nevermore, especially compared to basically everybody else working at that school. She helps Enid through her transformation issues, talks openly about identity, gives advice without sounding manipulative, and generally feels trustworthy, which is exactly why people started getting suspicious, especially once she leaves with Tyler at the end of the season. Because if you stop and think about it, that entire situation happens really fast. She offers Tyler a place at the sanctuary for masterless Hydes, barely explains anything about it, doesn't seem interested in approval from Nevermore or the authorities, and then just disappears with one of the most dangerous outcasts in the series. And maybe the sanctuary really is safe, but the show also gives us almost no actual information about it. We never see where it is. We don't know who runs it. We don't know how many Hydes are there already or what help even looks like for creatures that unstable, which leaves a lot of room for the show to turn the whole thing into something much darker later. And honestly, Isadora's background makes that possibility feel more believable than it probably should. Because her father was a Hyde. Her husband was one too. So she spent most of her life around people connected to Hyde transformations and the damage that comes with them. So she understands them in a way most characters at Nevermore probably never could. That could absolutely mean she genuinely wants to help them, but it could also mean she spent years learning how to manage them, organize them, maybe even weaponize them. And if Season 3 wants a larger scale threat, a hidden group of masterless Hydes led by somebody who understands exactly how unstable they are would honestly fit the show pretty well. Especially because Wednesday as a series likes villains who believe they're protecting people while doing increasingly questionable things. That's basically Thornhill's whole mindset in Season 1. And I could see a version of this storyline where Isadora genuinely believes Nevermore, Jericho, maybe even society itself failed Hydes completely. So instead of trying to integrate them, she creates her own separate structure around them, something that starts sounding compassionate and slowly becomes much more dangerous the longer Tyler stays there. What makes Tyler interesting in this theory is that he could realistically go either direction inside that environment. Maybe he realizes Isadora is manipulating vulnerable Hydes and tries to stop it. Or maybe part of him actually likes finally being around people who don't look at him like a monster all the time, even if the situation itself starts becoming morally wrong. And honestly, that second possibility feels more interesting to me because it keeps Tyler emotionally conflicted instead of turning him fully good or fully evil again. The only thing that makes me hesitate with this theory is Isadora herself, because unlike Thornhill, the show spends a lot of time making her feel emotionally sincere. Her scenes with Enid don't really play like manipulation. They play like somebody who genuinely understands what it feels like to struggle with identity and transformation. So if the show does reveal darker intentions later, it probably works better if Isadora still believes she's helping people in her own mind, rather than secretly being evil the entire time. Quick note, if you're enjoying the videos and want to support the channel, I've just launched a membership area called Nevermore Student. You get custom Wednesday badges next to your name in comments, exclusive emojis to use across the channel, and you're directly supporting more content like this. It's $2.99 a month. Just click the join button below the video or on the channel page if you'd like to support the channel and be part of the community. Now let's get back to the video. And here's the fourth theory, is also the most straightforward one. What if Tyler just stays dangerous? No redemption arc, no emotional recovery storyline, no good person trapped inside resolution where everything gets fixed over time, just Tyler getting worse. And honestly, I get why a lot of fans think that's where the show is heading, because Season 2 never fully walks back the darker parts of his character at all. That's important. The series doesn't treat Tyler like somebody who was completely innocent under Thornhill's control. Even after the reveal, there are still moments where it feels like the Hyde side of him isn't entirely separate from who he already was emotionally, especially once he starts talking more openly to Wednesday after she discovers the truth. There's anger there, resentment, and honestly, part of him seems to enjoy finally scaring people after spending most of his life feeling powerless, which makes the Tyler was only a victim interpretation harder to fully buy into. Then Season 2 adds even more reasons for him to spiral. He loses his father emotionally. He loses his mother physically. He becomes masterless. He's isolated, unstable. constantly treated like a threat. And whether his anger is fair or not almost stops mattering at a certain point, because grief doesn't usually make people rational. Especially in this show, a lot of Wednesday characters respond to pain by becoming more extreme versions of themselves, and Tyler could easily keep moving in that direction instead of pulling himself back from it. There's also the Hyde lore itself. The series keeps implying that masterless Hydes become more unstable over time, which creates the possibility that Tyler slowly loses control completely in Season 3. Not in a split personality way exactly, but more like the violent parts of him stop having boundaries anymore. And if the writers wanted Tyler to become the long-term physical threat of the series, that setup is already there, especially because from a structural standpoint, Tyler already has personal history with almost every major character. Wednesday hates what he did to her. Enid fought him directly, Sheriff Galpin is emotionally destroyed because of him, and the audience already has history with him too, which matters a lot more than introducing some completely new villain people don't care about yet. So I can absolutely see why some fans think the show is building toward a final confrontation where Tyler eventually comes back to Nevermore fully consumed by the Hyde side of himself. Maybe Isadora loses control of him, maybe he escapes, maybe he chooses violence willingly. Any of those versions could work. The only thing that makes me hesitate with this theory is that it risks making Tyler repetitive, because if Season 3 ends with Tyler was secretly dangerous again, then emotionally we're kind of back where Season 1 already left him. And I think the show knows the character works better when the audience feels conflicted about him instead of completely certain. That's probably why Wednesday freeing him at the end of Season 2 matters so much. The scene only really works if the show wants you questioning whether Tyler can still become something other than what Thornhill turned him into. If he just ends up as a straightforward monster again after that, the entire choice loses a lot of weight retroactively. And the last major theory is kind of the middle ground between redemption and full villain. Because Tyler doesn't completely recover, he doesn't become a normal hero, but he also doesn't stay the same person we saw at the end of Season 1. And honestly, I can see why this theory became popular because it fits the tone of Wednesday better than a clean, happy ending probably would, especially after Francoise. Her death feels really important to Tyler's future in a way I don't think the show is done with yet. The last thing he sees before leaving Nevermore is his mother dying trying to save him, even after everything that's happened. That kind of moment usually changes a character somehow. Not instantly, not magically, but it stays there. So a lot of fans think Season 3 could build toward Tyler eventually making the same kind of choice for somebody else. Maybe for Wednesday, maybe for Enid, maybe for people who still don't even trust him. And honestly, from a character perspective, that probably works better than Tyler suddenly becoming fully accepted by everybody again. Because even if he changes, the damage is still real. People died. Wednesday was manipulated. Enid almost got killed fighting him. You can't completely erase all of that without the story starting to feel emotionally dishonest. But Sacrifice is different. Sacrifice doesn't necessarily ask people to forget what Tyler did. It just changes the final thing they remember him for. And I could easily see a version of Season 3 where Tyler spends most of the season somewhere in between morally, trying to help sometimes, losing control other times, never fully trusted by the group. Then eventually some larger threat forces him into a situation where he has to choose between protecting himself or protecting someone else. And for the first time, he chooses someone else. Not because he expects forgiveness afterward, more because he finally understands what Francoise was trying to do for him. I also think this theory works because it lets the Hyde form become protective instead of purely destructive for once. That's something the series hasn't really explored yet. Every transformation so far has been tied to violence, manipulation, fear, revenge. So Tyler using the Hyde voluntarily to protect somebody instead would actually feel like a meaningful shift instead of just repeating the same conflict again. The only thing that makes me unsure about this theory is that redemption through death is a pretty common ending for morally messy characters. Sometimes it works emotionally. Sometimes it feels like the writers avoiding the harder question of what redemption actually looks like if the character survives long enough to live with what they did. And honestly, I think Wednesday as a show is usually more interesting when it leaves emotional mess unresolved instead of tying everything up neatly. So if Tyler ever does sacrifice himself, I think it probably works better if the scene feels complicated rather than purely heroic, something where people are still conflicted about him afterward, instead of suddenly deciding he was secretly good all along. So after looking through all these theories, I honestly don't think Season 3 is going to go fully in any one direction people are predicting. Not full redemption, not full villain. Probably not the Wednesday becomes his master thing either. If I had to guess, the show's most likely heading towards something slower and a lot more uncomfortable than that. Because the more I think about Tyler's storyline, the more it feels like the show is less interested in answering, is Tyler good or bad, and more interested in keeping him stuck somewhere in the middle where nobody, including Tyler himself, fully knows the answer yet. And honestly, that fits Wednesday pretty well as a series. A lot of the characters aren't really clean heroes or villains. They're damaged people making messy choices while trying to figure out who they actually are underneath all the expectations placed on them. And Tyler's entire life has basically been shaped by other people controlling him. First his Hyde condition, then Thornhill, then Willow Hill, then everybody else deciding whether he deserves to exist safely or not. So I think season 3 probably becomes the first time Tyler actually has to decide for himself what kind of person he wants to be without somebody else steering him, which is harder than redemption usually sounds in theory. Because even if Tyler wants to change, that doesn't suddenly erase everything he did. Wednesday remembers, Enid remembers, Jericho remembers, and honestly, I really hope the show doesn't rush past that part. If everybody forgives Tyler too quickly, the story loses weight immediately. But at the same time, making him a full villain again feels too easy too. We already saw that version of the character in season 1. Repeating it again would probably feel more repetitive than tragic. That's why I think the Isadora Sanctuary setup is probably real, not secretly evil, not a trap, just an actual place where Hydes are trying to survive without masters controlling them. But that doesn't mean Tyler suddenly gets better there overnight either. Honestly, he probably gets worse before he gets better. The Hyde side of him is still unstable, he's isolated from everybody he knew before, and for maybe the first time in his life, he has nobody directly controlling what choices he makes anymore. That freedom could go badly really fast. Meanwhile, Wednesday's probably dealing with whatever bigger threat season 3 introduces, and eventually Tyler gets pulled back into the story because their arcs are still connected whether either of them likes it or not. Not romantically necessarily, just emotionally unfinished. And I think that's where the show becomes interesting again, because the tension works better if nobody fully trusts Tyler, including the audience. He helps sometimes, he loses control other times. Enid still hates him. Wednesday still doesn't know whether freeing him was smart or a huge mistake. That's a much more interesting dynamic than Tyler is good now. And honestly, it also leaves the character room to keep evolving beyond one season, because if season 3 ends with Tyler still trying, still unstable, still complicated, still not fully forgiven, then the show can keep building on that instead of closing his arc too early, which feels more realistic for a character like him anyway. Some damage in stories shouldn't disappear after one emotional speech and a fight scene. Tyler's probably the hardest character in Wednesday to predict right now because the show keeps refusing to lock him into one role. One episode he feels sympathetic, then 5 minutes later he feels genuinely dangerous again. And honestly, I think that's intentional, because the interesting part of Tyler's character was never really, is he secretly good or secretly evil? It's that he keeps sitting somewhere in between those two things in a way that makes everybody around him uncomfortable, including Wednesday. He's somebody who absolutely did terrible things. The show never erases that, but he's also somebody who was manipulated, controlled, isolated, and psychologically damaged long before Wednesday ever met him. And those two things can exist at the same time. That's what makes him harder to categorize than most of the other characters in the series. Because with Tyler, the show keeps asking whether somebody can still deserve a chance to become better after crossing lines you can't really uncross. And honestly, I think season 3 works best if it keeps that tension alive instead of rushing toward a clean answer. Not everybody needs to forgive him. Some people probably never should, but watching Tyler try to figure out who he actually is without a master controlling him anymore, that's probably more interesting than turning him into either a perfect redemption story or a straightforward monster again. Especially in a show like Wednesday, where most characters are already struggling with identity in one way or another. So whatever direction season 3 goes, I really don't think Tyler's storyline is going to end neatly. And honestly, it probably shouldn't, because the messier the character stays, the more interesting he usually becomes to watch. But now I'm really curious what you think. So, do you think Tyler deserves redemption at all? Or do you think Wednesday made a mistake freeing him at the end of season 2? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, you can subscribe for more. I also share updates and extra content on Instagram. And right here, there's another video you might enjoy. Click on it and I'll see you in a few seconds.